Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akiriduluale. The headlines. U.S. President Joe Biden says nuclear risk is at its highest level since the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. Russian lawmaker urges senior officials to tell the truth about battle developments, stressing the need to, quote, stop lying. And death toll rises to 7 after missile strikes on Zaporizhzhia in Ukraine. U.S. President Joe Biden says the risk of a nuclear Armageddon is at its highest level since the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, adding that Russia's President Vladimir Putin is, quote, not joking when he spoke of using tactical nuclear weapons after suffering setbacks in Ukraine. According to Mr. Biden, the U.S. is, quote, trying to figure out Mr. Putin's way out of the war. The United States and the European Union had previously said Mr. Putin's nuclear saber rattling should be taken seriously. However, the U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan last week had said, in spite of Moscow's nuclear hints, the U.S. had seen no signs that Russia was imminently preparing to use a nuclear weapon. For several months, U.S. officials have been warning that Russia could resort to the use of weapons of mass destruction if it suffered setbacks on the battlefield. President Biden said the reason the Russian leader had not been joking when he talked about using nuclear, biological or chemical weapons is because his military is, you might say, significantly underperforming. Meanwhile, Moscow says it remains fully committed to the principle of never allowing a nuclear war to be fought, as fears have grown over a possible dramatic escalation in the 7-month conflict with Ukraine. Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova told a briefing that Moscow's position that a nuclear war must never be fought has not changed, even though President Vladimir Putin had previously said he was not bluffing over his willingness to use nuclear weapons to defend Russia's territorial integrity.
We don't intend to play a part in this horrible discourse designed to pump up the nuclear rhetoric, edging it up a notch every time. It is the NATO-centric structures and countries and those who serve their interests in the information area that's doing this. The Russian Federation is fully committed to the principle of the inadmissibility of nuclear war. We have repeatedly said and reiterated this: there can be no winners in such a war. It must never be waged. I will not be reading out loud the doctrine documents again because our position has not changed at all.
And the death toll after the Russian missile strikes on Ukraine's southern city of Zaporizhzhia this morning has risen to 7, and that's according to its regional governor, Alexander Staruk, saying that at least 5 people are still considered missing and efforts to determine the exact number of dead and injured are continuing. He thanked the prompt work of special forces, rescuers and doctors, which made it possible to save 21 people. He adds that the firing of S-300 air defense missiles, which Russia has used increasingly to attack civilian and other targets in Ukraine, was a real act of terrorism. And in reaction to this, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is accusing Russia of conducting a double-tap strike on Zaporizhzhia. Mr. Zelensky made the accusation in an address to European leaders who gathered in Prague for an informal meeting the same day Zaporizhzhia was attacked by 7 missiles, according to local authorities. Addressing the meeting via video link, Mr. Zelensky urged leaders to turn the new political community into a European community of peace so that Russian tanks do not advance or Warsaw or again on Prague.
When people came to pick apart the rubble, and Russia struck again with rockets. Unfortunately, there are deaths, wounded people, burned down buildings. In Zaporizhzhia, after the first rocket strike today, when people came to pick apart the rubble, Russia conducted a second rocket strike. Absolute vileness, absolute evil. There have been thousands of instances of this already, and there could be thousands more, unfortunately. In 225 days of the full-scale war, We all have already demonstrated that Europe can influence the question of war and peace. We all together have to act to the formula of war be completely blocked, and the formula of peace to be completely realized.
Still on Zaporizhzhia, President Zelensky has met with the International Atomic Energy Agency IAEA chief Rafael Grossi in Kyiv, addressing the problem of Russian soldiers' presence at Europe's nuclear power plant. The president says, according to information which is provided by the plant's workers, there are around 500 Russian soldiers there holding Ukrainians hostage. President Vladimir Putin has also ordered the Russian state to seize control of the nuclear power station about 50 kilometers southwest of Zaporizhzhia city. The plant is still run by Ukrainian engineers in spite of being captured early in the war by Russian forces. The power station is close to the front line on a Russian-controlled bank of a huge reservoir with Ukrainian forces on the opposite bank. Both sides have warned of the danger of a potential nuclear disaster if the plant is hit. And at a news conference after the meeting, Mr. Grossi said that the United Nations nuclear watchdog considered the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant to be a Ukrainian facility. Russia, as we just reported, captured the plant in March, shortly after invading Ukraine, and President Putin has ordered his government to take control of it. The plant is Europe's largest, and Ukrainian staff, though, continue to operate on it. Mr. Grossi is due to travel to Moscow for talks with Russian officials following his visit to the Ukrainian capital.
I think this is a matter that has to do with international law. We are here in a conflict. We are here in a war. We want this war to stop. The war should stop immediately. And of course, the position of the IAEA is that this facility is a Ukrainian facility. But I don't get into comments about military developments. The staff at the plant is operating under almost unbearable circumstances. The stress, the uncertainty, not knowing what is going to happen. The IAEA, as an international organization, has a mission, has a legal parameter to do it, and what I will be is very consistent, as I have been from the very beginning. We are not changing our line. We are continuing saying what needs to be done, which is basically avoid a nuclear accident at the plant, which is still a very, very clear possibility. I don't have any indication at this moment, today, that this is the case. And by the way, doing such a thing is not a matter of switching on and off from one grid to the other. This may require major infrastructural work. So we would know about this, we would see what happens. We have two staff, and we are going to be enlarging the group to a group of 4.
Ukrainian forces have recaptured more than 500 square kilometers of territory and dozens of settlements in the southern Kherson region alone since October the 1st. And that's coming from President Volodymyr Zelensky, saying there had been more military successes in the east. Mr. Zelensky also addressed the situation at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, Europe's largest, saying if it does not work, we'll face certain difficulties in Ukraine. We get a situation where we do not have a surplus of electricity, in particular to export to EU countries.
Since October 1, and in the Kherson region alone, more than 500 square kilometers of territory and dozens of settlements have been liberated and stabilized from the Russian pseudo-referendum. Another aspect of this topic is electricity itself. And if the Zaporizhzhia plant does not work, we face certain difficulties in Ukraine. We get a situation where we do not have a surplus of electricity, which we can, in particular, export to EU countries. It is also a disadvantage for the EU nations, who lose a reliable source of energy supply. It is a minus for us, Ukrainians. We honestly talk about it. We honestly say that all of us in Europe must fight for our interests together in complete unity.
The head of Russia's State Duma Defense Committee is demanding senior officials to report the truth about developments on the battlefield in Ukraine, telling a journalist that senior figures need to, quote, stop lying. Colonel General Andrei Katapolov said in an interview with Vladimir Solovyov, which was posted on Solovyov's Telegram channel, first of all, we need to stop lying. We've brought this up many times before, but somehow it's apparently not getting through to individual senior figures. According to Colonel Kapotov, the city of Valyivki in Russia is under constant fire. We've learned about this from all sorts of folks, from governors, telegram channels, our war correspondents, but no one else. But people know. People are not stupid, but they don't want to even tell part of the truth. This can lead to a loss of credibility. He continued using Russian President Vladimir Putin's false accusations of Nazism to justify his war in Ukraine. Valyivki is in the region of Belgorod in western Russia, near the border with Ukraine. The United States has accused Russian mercenaries of exploiting natural resources in the Central African Republic, Mali, Sudan, and elsewhere to help Moscow fund its war in Ukraine, a charge that Russia has rejected as anti-Russian rage. The U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, says the Wagner group of mercenaries are exploiting natural resources, and the gains are used to fund Moscow's war machine in Africa, the Middle East, and Ukraine. Ms. Thomas-Greenfield was speaking at the UN Security Council meeting on the financing of armed groups through the illicit trafficking of natural resources in Africa. However, Russia's UN ambassador Vasily Nebenzia said he regretted that Mrs. Thomas-Greenfield had raised the issue of Russian support to African partners. Wagner is staffed by veterans of Russia's armed forces and has fought in Libya, Syria, the Central African Republic, and Mali, amongst other countries. It was founded in 2014 after Russia annexed Ukraine's Crimea Peninsula and started providing support to pro-Russia separatists in Ukraine's eastern Donbas region.
One of the most immediate and growing concerns in Africa is the Kremlin-backed Wagner Group's strategy of exploiting the natural resources of the Central African Republic, Mali, and Sudan, as well as other countries. These actions are thoroughly documented and irrefutable, and we know these ill-gotten gains are used to fund Moscow's war machine in Africa, the Middle East, and Ukraine. And rather than being a transparent partner and improving security, Wagner exploits client states who pay for their heavy-handed security services in gold, diamond, timber, and other natural resources. This is part of Wagner Group's business model. Make no mistake, people across Africa are paying a heavy price for the Wagner Group's exploitative practices and human rights violations.
Mr. President, in conclusion, I would like to express our regret that the United States, in their anti-Russian rage, have reached the point where, in their statement, put the issue to the forefront of Russian support to its African partners. This exposes their real plans and aims, what they really need from African countries. We're surprised by the words of the permanent representative of the United States when she's talking about client states. That's American terminology. We do not use that. For us, the African countries are not clients. They are our partners. I'd like to recall here, by the way, that in Syria, the United States, under the cover of counterterrorism, are stealing Syrian oil before an untrustworthy company was appointed for that. And then, when the situation seemed too scandalous, even to its allies, the United States returned to stealing Syrian national resources using their own military.
The European Union and its neighbors from Britain to Turkey have met to discuss shared security and energy problems stemming from Moscow's invasion of Ukraine in a rare and symbolic summit of 44 European countries, but not Russia. The Prague gathering is the inaugural summit of the European political community a format that is a brainchild of French President Emmanuel Macron and brings together the 27 European Union members with 17 other European countries. Some of them are waiting to join the bloc, while another, Britain, is the only one to have left it. Diplomats say no such Europe-wide grouping exists, and this is a good moment to forge one as the whole continent grapples with the consequences of war, including the threat to peace and security and an economically devastating energy crisis. The host of the summit, Czech Prime Minister Petr Fiala, welcomes the EU leaders to the event.
Russia's action from the last week confirmed it yet again. Holding the referenda in occupied territories was a dirty trick. The international community cannot take it seriously. Many of you have the similar experiences in the history of your countries. We understand it is tough to face evil, but we also understand that truth does win. It can take time, but in the end, we all know in our hearts that Ukraine will win, because the truth is on their side. We are certainly not going to establish another European organization. We are not going to replace the existing formats of cooperation. We have plenty of them already. We will not even be adopting any official resolutions today. The point is simple: to have an honest discussion on the matters of common interest, but also on disputed topics. There are so many challenges to our prosperity that require our cooperation. I have already mentioned the need to find peace and security, but it doesn't end here. There is also inflation and high energy prices causing worse living standards in Europe. There is our dependence on imported resources, threatening our energy security.
British Prime Minister Liz Truss also joined the European countries in Prague at a historic first meeting of a new political forum of nations. At the summit, she met with France's Emmanuel Macron, describing him as a friend, having previously declined to say whether he was a friend or foe. Leaders from the EU, Turkey, Norway and the Balkans attended at the meeting. Ahead of it, Ms. Truss made clear it was not an EU construct or an EU alternative. She later told broadcasters the meeting was not about moving closer to Europe, but about working with Europe on issues that we both face. Nevertheless, her decision to take part could mark a new phase in the UK's post-Brexit relations with Europe. For Mr. Macron, he says he is glad British Prime Minister Liz Truss had joined other European leaders in a summit in Prague. The summit of the European political community has been championed by him, and he told reporters it sent a message of unity. Mr. Macron announced that European countries would send Ukraine more military equipment to counter Russia, including more French Caesar-type howitzers. Maya Sandu, President of Moldova, which will host the next EU summit, also reiterated the group's commitment to helping Ukraine. The Czech Prime Minister Petr Fiala, who hosted the gathering, said he hoped the meeting's discussions would soon be followed by mutual action.
It is a journey for hosting the first meeting of the European.
Having the Prime Minister Liz Truss here in Prague is a very good news, and I think a very good choice she made. And I think having the UK being engaged in a lot of common initiatives, I think does make sense.
She would call you a friend, after all, and the two of you had what appeared to be a pretty productive...
Because this is an island, this is true, but this island didn't move from the rest of the continent. So we do have so many things in common, and we have values, and we have history and so on. So I'm happy that we meet again.
Our collective goal is to work together on strengthening the security, stability and prosperity of Europe. And I hope that our today's discussion will be followed by mutual actions.
For hosting the first meeting of the European political community, and we are united in condemning Russian aggression against Ukraine and the illegal annexation of its territories. We are united in our commitment to help Ukraine uphold its sovereignty.
We'll take a break on Russian invasion this morning. When we come back, we'll be taking more stories and developments, both from the summit and indeed on the battlefield. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Britain's National Grid has warned that the country could face 3-hour planned power cuts to homes and businesses this winter if it cannot import electricity from Europe. And this is as it struggles to attract enough gas imports to fuel gas-fired power plants. The prospect of power cuts comes as Prime Minister Liz Truss called on Europe to keep energy exports flowing during the winter, and is likely to heap further pressure on the government after she previously ruled out energy rationing in Britain. Countries across Europe are drawing up winter contingency plans against the disruption of flows of gas from Russia because of the war in Ukraine, which could lead to rationing and a curb in exports of energy to other countries. A shortage of gas in Europe, as well as maintenance issues with several French nuclear power plants, have raised the risk that Britain could be unable to secure the gas it needs or the imports of electricity it typically receives from countries such as France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. Let's talk now to our business correspondent, Ini John McGuire, who joins me. Good morning, Ini.
Good morning.
I'm sure this issue, this story from Britain, you'll probably be talking to Juliana about.
Yes.
As I was looking at the story, 3-hour power cuts, that sounded a bit more like here than Britain, and I'm sure.
You know, South Africa calls it load shedding. And it used to be really strange for countries like the UK, but unfortunately it's now spilling over there.
Indeed.
But I think right here, I mean, we don't even call it load shedding.
Load shedding anymore. We just, I mean, I think it's the other way around. When we have power,
That's the unusual time.
That's
when you're doing your generator or any other alternative,
that's normal.
That's the norm. So can we say to the UK guys, welcome to the club.
To the club, indeed. If it happens, well, I'm sure Juliana will argue with you that it's unlikely to happen.
But Juliana has been crying about it, especially the hike in the prices and all of that. And even with the cap that the Prime Minister has promised, you know, I mean, fine, it's applaudable and all of that. But as we have said, and we discussed it last week also, when Ofgem talked about the fact that some plants might be shut down because they cannot operate, and they're trying to escape that penalty that comes as a result of shutting down.
Right.
You know, because, I mean, it's becoming kind of obvious that they cannot, or they may not be able to escape it, and this winter may be a cold one for a lot of Britons.
Now, taking with that, oil prices in the aftermath of OPEC's production cut yesterday. What are they looking like now? Yesterday you were saying, okay, they went up a bit.
Still surging. We haven't seen anything to make it taper now. It's still surging, and we see countries trying to get alternative. We talked about Turkey yesterday, and some of the new round of sanctions that comes on Russia from the EU and how it's affecting them, and obviously squeezing their source of energy of gas and oil. And of course, that is contained in how they get their energy, and causing more surge in the price of energy and all of that. So the price of oil is still surging as at this time. We haven't seen, and it seems like Saudi Arabia is really out to get.
Yes, I mean, they made that clear. That if you are able to put your economic interests first, we should too.
We should. But at the end of the day, inflation will affect everybody. And then for a lot of countries, there's the imported inflation. So when there's inflation in one country, most likely it will move to another country. You know, we saw, for instance, the markets, even including crypto market. Normally, we see a lot of markets dip on Fridays. But just because we're expecting job data from the United States now, investors are uncertain, and then we see a dip in a lot of market this morning. The futures and all of that are down because we're expecting, job numbers from the United States. So
it's a bit rough. But then, I mean, you talked about Turkey and the issue of alternative sources. It's having a gas deal on the sea with Libya. This is an attempt to wean itself off Russian.
Yes, because yesterday we did talk about how about 50% of their exports goes to EU and non-EU, the West.
Right.
So if with the new sanction which came in place yesterday from the European Union, they may be caught up as a secondary...
Yes, in the secondary sanctions
exactly, for dealing with Russia. And yet, that's where they get the major part of their oil and gas. So, actually, this deal is not new, but I think it had some controversy with Libya because they signed it with a former administration. And they have some issues in Libya now where one administration is in power in the capital, another is in
the east.
Exactly. So, they supported, I think they even supplied them with drones to help fight the war. And so, that side of the administration is the one who signed the deal with them, and so the other side is saying this deal cannot hold. So it's kind of
it's a bit controversial because incidentally the other side that is outside the capital is in charge of the refineries and the plants that are producing.
And unfortunately, it's the other side that signed the deal.
This deal,
so,
that's right.
I mean, I think this it's a difficult time for Turkey now, and still, even though they are determined not to raise rates as others are doing, that's why we see the inflation really high, and still they're not doing anything about it, at least in that aspect. They're trying to focus on economic growth and productivity. But, I mean, having to deal with this again is another blow to them, because what can you do without energy? What can you do without power?
All industries are dependent on it, and everybody is dependent, as we were talking about in the case of Britain.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned yesterday the issue of the ban on metals and all of that, and so now the crypto ban is now in effect.
Yes, it's now extended. So we know that Russia has been trying to develop its CBDC, central bank digital currency.
Right.
And they've also been looking to crypto space for cross-border payments, even though they say that individual Russians are not allowed
to participate
so
in
it's
that,
just the government. So the EU has gone to that space now, and they said they're going to restrict, or they have banned transactions from Russia wallets to any EU wallet or any EU transaction.
Right.
But the thing with crypto is a decentralized finance space. It's not like the centralized one where, you can control, you have the central bank watching over and limiting activities. So just like the price cap, this may kind of be difficult for the EU to implement, because if some individuals still want to interact, I mean, for instance, you go to the Binance platform and then you want to do peer-to-peer, for instance, even though the person is a Russian or the person, it might be difficult where is the authority
to prevent that from happening or to examine or regulate it?
Exactly. So it can be on individual basis. People see that, this transaction as a destination is from Russia, and they might say, no, I don't want to deal with the person. But I mean, as EU, as a commission, or as a regulator, it might be difficult for them to implement it, just as they are struggling to see how to deal with that price cap issue, because individual countries can decide to interact and transact, with Russia, and they may hardly be able to stop that.
Now, we've talked about it several times, and of course we've even talked about it here. The issue of wheat and what this conflict has caused the countries that are highly dependent on wheat. Now, one of those countries is Egypt. In fact, governments have been overthrown on the basis of the unavailability of bread.
Exactly.
So it's a very serious matter.
Very serious.
Now, they've imported a lot, a whole lot of wheat.
They used to import 60% of their wheat, 60%. So for an annual consumption of wheat in Egypt was placed about 20 million tons annually. 60% of that normally used to be imported, mostly from Russia, and then they have from some other countries. But what they've done, and it's really impressive, I do think that I mean, sometimes it just feels like we're just talking. But within 3 months, they've been able to produce more than 3 million tons of wheat. And they have drastically reduced their importation of wheat. So the local farmers are the one providing wheat for majorly for what is being consumed in Egypt. And we know that, I mean, their menu is mostly, comes from wheat and...
Oh, yes, and it's byproducts.
Yes, and it's byproducts. So to have within July and September them producing 3.5, I think it's really impressive, and it's something that a lot of countries are looking at. What are they doing? And they're still working more on this. They're not relaxing. That's not the peak of it. You know, if they can do this in 3 months, they're working on issues of silos, storages, equipment, mechanized farming, and really empowering the farmers. The government seems to be working directly with the farmers, removing all those middlemen and all of that, you understand, and making it very profitable for them. So
this is an existential threat, so everybody's attention is focused there. And I mean, we're talking about food here.
We're talking about food.
There are lessons in it, should I say, for some other suspects, including Nigeria, because we have also...
we just keep importing. I mean, yesterday on Business Incorporated, we talked about palm oil, and we import about, I think, 50% or more of what we consume. When we have the ability, we have the resources.
And to think that at some point we were one of the world's biggest
Malaysia
exporters.
Came here to take the fruits.
Seeds. Yeah, people keep
and today
never
we are
stop
importing
talking about
from
that.
Malaysia, we're importing from Indonesia.
Did
I say more?
Yes. No, you need to say more. Now, generally speaking, you know, as we wrap this up, yesterday the markets were mixed.
Yes.
It's still early.
Yesterday,
looking at the
Nigeria's market went down more than 3%. The equities in Nigeria, it was a really big blow. I mean, we do know that equities it's an uncertain time in Nigeria. Yesterday we talked about how you cannot really predict, or government policies do not really trickle down to affect investor sentiments and actions. But yesterday, I mean, going down more than 3%, that was a major one for Nigeria. Even though we traced it to, you know, sell-off on MTN and Airtel, but I think it does say a lot about what's going on in the economy. Economists have put this at the feet of a lot of political activities and uncertainty. Investors do not seem to have
the confidence to stay in.
Exactly.
So they're playing
watch and see.
That's it.
You know, because we expected that. We had a new listing, Geregu, the first power generating firm to be listed. And that's a big deal. So we expected at least that should have a major impact. So even though we saw that it increased the market cap, but it still wasn't enough. The activities
to lift.
It was not. In fact, the market cap, I mean, the all-share index dropped. From 48, we have been managing 49,000 points. And we went down to 47,000 yesterday. So that was just a major one. And then global markets are now reacting to the wait for job data from the United States.
Indeed. So there are quite a lot of people who are also waiting on that, because that has its spiral-on effect to other economies,
of course,
depending on what the figures eventually say.
But I really do wish that there will be a day when the world will be waiting to see, okay, the Central Bank of Nigeria is meeting, let's see what will come out of it, and that will determine the direction of the market, the direction. I mean, Nigeria is the most populous country on the continent. Nigeria is a major oil producer. Let's see if they meet up with their quota. That will affect the price of oil. You know, that would just make you so proud to carry the green passport.
Indeed, Ini. I share your wishes and your desire. I'm sure that as the day goes on. And incidentally, today is the last day of the week, so we'll just keep our fingers crossed and hope that today is better
than yesterday. We hope at least people will buy the dip and then we'll report a green market.
Uptick, indeed, an uptick
at the close of trade today.
Thank you, Ini. Thank you
for having me.
Of course, Ini will be back at 10 o'clock on Business Morning, as she did say. And later on, she'll be on Business Incorporated at 1:30. So do watch out for those. Thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come on the program, who will win the coveted Nobel Prize for Peace? The battle is between Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Let's speak now to security expert Vince Onyekwelu, who joins us virtually. Good morning to you, Vince. Thank you for your time this morning.
Good morning.
Let's start from the battlefield, shall we? There is so much being said about the issue, the possible use, the movement, the repercussions of nuclear weapons. Both the Americans and the EU officials are saying that nobody should think that President Vladimir Putin of Russia is bluffing when he says that he might resort to the use of nuclear weapons, even though this morning his spokesperson has clarified that they still believe in the doctrine that Russia has for its use of nuclear weapons. What do you think?
Personally, I believe that Russia is not going to use nuclear weapons. I believe it's more like taking what President Putin said out of context. If Russia were to use nuclear weapons, the impact on Russian citizens would be huge. The impact on the nation of Russia would be very catastrophic. I think when you want to use nuclear weapons, you don't have to use it with a nation that you share national boundaries with. Obviously, one of the nations that we know that have used nuclear weapons against another nation is United States of America. And we knew that from the USA to Japan to Nagasaki, the distance is huge. So there is no issue of repercussions or side effects. So I think professionally, looking from the chemical context of nuclear weapons, it's not safe. And I think also it's possible that President Biden is using Russia for political purposes. Don't forget that the midterm elections are coming up in the next 1 month or thereabout. I think the propaganda that Russia is going to use nuclear weapons is just like taking things out of context to make Russia look like a foe and to make others look like a friend. Russia will not use nuclear weapons. Take that from me.
That will be very comforting to those who are around the theater and even far from the theater of conflict. But let me then bring you to that meeting that that took place in Prague between the European Union countries plus, as they're calling it, the EU plus, including countries that are not within the EU. And this war has been at the center of it. There are quite a number of people who say that, you know, nobody expected the war to last this long. And because it has lasted this long, there is a certain battle fatigue, even though none of them has been directly involved in the battle. But they have been supplying Ukraine with weapons, supplying Ukraine with money, and all of that. This kind of meeting, do you see a situation where perhaps the unity that the EU has displayed over the last 7 months or so is becoming frayed?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that the new idea of the European political community is not, everybody is not pro the EPC. The EPC, to some people, seems to be like an old idea that is being regurgitated to bring it back to life. Bringing the 27 nations of the EU to share common table with other 14, 15 nations that are not part of the EU is a big issue. However, their focus is on what? Immigration, energy, and then Russia. Now look at immigration. Most of European countries today are going into center right or even far right. Look at nations like Italy. they've gone far right now. Look at nations like Germany, they've gone far right now. And when nations of Europe go far right or go center right, it means they are beginning to become anti-immigration. They are not willing to get people come from different cultures and now force their lifestyle upon them. Look at the hike in criminality in some parts of Germany that took so many Syrian migrants into Germany. The same thing in Denmark, the same thing in Norway. So it's not good for Europe. Look at the economic impact on Europe. Lately, the US dollar has gained so much power upon the euro and upon the British pounds. These are things that have not been heard for over a long time. And many European leaders are now thinking, is this war, is it helping the American economy more than it's helping the European economy? Look at the fracture of the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, the climate impact of those release of gas into that particular sea. Look at the future impact on Europe. So many right-wing nations in Europe is asking themselves, immigration has to stop. Energy, we have to figure out how to bring more energy into our European shores. And trust me, you cannot avoid Russian energy, at least in the next 2-3 years, because you have to build new infrastructures. Whether you're going to Doha or to Qatar or to Bahrain, you need to build new infrastructures. And now look at the issue of Russia and Ukraine. Honestly, I had a leader saying yesterday at the EPC that for Europe to come together, Russia needs to be included. And that's coming from the former Chancellor of Germany. I don't remember her name, the female Chancellor of Germany, saying that Europe cannot come together without Russia. So I think, in all earnest, Europe is asking themselves questions. Is this fracas with Ukraine and Russia helping Europe more, or is it helping the Americans more?
I must, of course, then ask that if we're going forward now, you mentioned it there. One of the things they're discussing is the energy issue. And those who have been fairly truthful have said that you cannot address the energy issue in the short or perhaps even medium term without bringing Russia into the mix. Russia is a member of OPEC Plus, and using its membership of OPEC Plus, it was one of those that decided on very steep production cuts, which have taken the price of oil once again back up. One doesn't know where it will stop. This is happening at the same time as this, gas shortage within Europe. And winter is here for many of the countries in Europe. The economic crisis is there. Do you see this having an impact on what they are able to do in support of Ukraine? Because Ukraine is standing against Russia only because of this support it has received from the United States and from Europe.
Exactly. Many European nations, as I said to you, are having political challenges. That was why Italy now has their first female prime minister in their history. It's part of all this issue of energy, immigration. And if you look at that statement made by the new Italian prime minister, when she was accused by Emmanuel Macron about not being fair to immigrants and not being fair, she reminded Emmanuel Macron that if you're talking about fairness, that I would say that France are still printing monies, currencies for about 6 African nations. That France is still holding reserve of about 6 francophone nations in Africa. That France is still fighting wars for some presidents in francophone Africa. So you see that there's a split in Europe that is going on. There's a deep split. The Germans are not happy about the immigration policies of the European Union upon Germany as a nation. And that is one of the reasons why the UK had to pull out of the EU, because Europe goes to cause trouble or somewhere. Okay, let me rephrase. Europe goes to bring migrants from certain countries and now say, UK, you must take 2,000 migrants. Germany, you must take 3,000 migrants. They force these migrants upon you. And as time goes on, these migrants start to force you to change your cultures. So many countries in Europe are not enjoying it. So when the EPC is coming together, people are asking, what is Emmanuel Macron up with this idea of European political community? Having in mind that Liz Truss wasn't the best friend of Emmanuel Macron, But yesterday she used that term that said Macron is a friend, Russia is a foe. Most of them are using Russia as a political mileage. Most of them are scared to go to the elections or to the polls today. If Liz Truss was to call for elections this December, there is no certainty that she's going to win election in Britain today. We know how Macron just won the election last year. It was just by the sneak. Mr. Biden is going to the polls in the next 1 month or so. So they are trying to use Russia as a platform to win elections. But the truth is, Russia is even getting stronger financially, economically, because it's diversified. And in conclusion, look at what's happening behind USA today. The Chinese have gone into Brazil. The Chinese have gone to the back of the Americans. They are giving Brazil infrastructures, what Americans never give to Brazil before. And the Americans are beginning to feel the threat that the Chinese have finally arrived in Southern America. And the business goes on. The game is expanding.
This are proving to be very interesting times in geopolitics. The Russia-Ukraine war has brought out quite a lot from many of the countries, either directly participating or indirectly participating. Mr. Vince Onyekwelu, thank you for your time this morning. We'll, of course, have you with us in the very near future to discuss the developments more. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And just before we go, our final story. The winner of the Nobel Peace Prize is expected to be announced today in Norway as Europe's biggest war for 7 decades rages on the continent. Russia's conflict in Ukraine means that this year's announcement will rank among the most closely watched and complicated decisions made by the Norwegian Nobel Committee in recent times. The award of the Peace Prize, one of humanity's most coveted accolades, often serves as an offer of hope in uncertain times. But experts in the fields of peace and security warn that the bleak geopolitical picture may muddle 2022's award. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky sits atop many bookmakers' list of favorites to win the prize, and some companies also list as frontrunners the general population of Ukraine and the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, which has aided people displaced by the war. Critics of the Russian regime and its allies are amongst those many expect to clinch the award, most notably Alexei Navalny, the Kremlin critic and opposition leader. Belarusian opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya is also generally seen as a strong contender. The dissident was forced into exile in Lithuania after running against strongman leader and Putin ally Alexander Lukashenko in August 2020 in an election that was denounced by the international community as neither free nor fair. Well, we'll wait and see as the day progresses who is it who will have the prize. My name is Ladi Akiri Duluali. That's our program this morning and this week. Thanks for being with us. There's an update on the world today at 5 o'clock, and the show is back on Monday. Do have yourselves a pleasant weekend ahead. Good morning.